Imagine a civilization that thrived for 3,000 years, longer than every modern nation combined, and did it all without a single coin. No dollars, no euros, no shiny pieces of gold changing hands in a marketplace. Ancient Egypt ran one of the most sophisticated economies the world has ever seen, and they did it with grain. Last episode, we saw how Hammurabi's Babylon created laws to regulate merchants, lenders, and free markets. But Egypt took a completely different path. While Babylon refereed an economy, Egypt built one from the top down. The pharaoh didn't just rule the economy. The pharaoh was the economy. So how did it work? Let's start with the basics. For most of Egypt's history, there were no coins at all. They did have a unit of account, the deben, a standardized weight of copper, about 91 grams. Think of it like a mental price tag. You could say a goat was worth 3 deben, or a fine linen garment was worth 5, but you weren't handing anyone a copper nugget at the market. Instead, the real currency, the thing people actually exchanged, was grain. Wheat and barley, the stuff of life. And at the center of everything sat the granary. State-run granaries were Egypt's central economic institution, part warehouse, part bank, part social safety net. After every harvest, surplus grain flowed into these massive storage facilities controlled by the pharaoh's administration. Farmers could deposit their grain and receive a written receipt. They could withdraw it later. They could even transfer that receipt to someone else. Let that sink in. A farmer in ancient Egypt could hand a piece of papyrus to a merchant, and that merchant could go collect grain from a state granary using that document. That is, functionally, a check. Some historians argue these transferable grain receipts were the world's first form of paper money, thousands of years before China's Song dynasty, which usually gets the credit. Now, none of this ran itself. Behind the granary system was an army of scribes, the bureaucrats of the ancient world. These men tracked every harvest yield, every tax payment, every grain deposit, every ration distributed. They measured, they counted, they recorded. Egypt was, in a very real sense, a data-driven command economy millennia before anyone invented that term. If you think spreadsheets are a modern invention, the scribes of ancient Egypt would like a word. Taxation was straightforward but ingenious. Every year, after the Nile flooded and receded, leaving behind that miraculous strip of fertile black soil, tax assessors would go out and physically measure each farmer's fields. Based on the size of the land and the expected yield, they calculated what was owed. Typically 10 to 20% of the harvest, paid in grain directly to the state. This wasn't guesswork. It required advanced mathematics, geometry, and surveying. Economics literally drove mathematical innovation. The reason Egyptians became brilliant geometers, they needed to calculate taxes. So where did all that grain go? A huge portion went right back to the people, as wages. And here's where we need to destroy one of history's most persistent myths. The workers who built the pyramids, the temples, the colossal monuments, they were not slaves. They were paid laborers. We know this because of Deir el-Medina, a workers' village near the Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists have uncovered incredibly detailed records from this site, wage lists, attendance logs, even sick day records. Workers received bread, beer, grain, and sometimes textiles as payment. There were different pay grades. Foremen earned more than laborers. It was an organized, documented payroll system. And just like modern workers, when the pay didn't show up, they fought back. Around 1152 BCE, under Pharaoh Ramesses III, the grain rations to the tomb workers at Deir el-Medina were delayed. Corruption and mismanagement had disrupted the supply chain, so the workers did something unprecedented. They stopped working. They marched out of the necropolis and staged a sit-in near the mortuary temples, chanting, "We are hungry." This is the first recorded labor strike in human history. 3,000 years ago, workers organized and demanded what they were owed. Labor economics is nothing new, but Egypt's grain system wasn't just about paying workers. It was genuine social insurance. The state maintained enormous reserves specifically to survive bad years. If the Nile flood was weak, and sometimes it was, famine could threaten the entire population. The granaries were the buffer. You might recognize this concept from an old story. In the book of Genesis, Joseph advises Pharaoh to store grain during 7 years of abundance to survive 7 years of famine. Whether or not you take the story literally, it reflects a real Egyptian practice. State grain reserves were a deliberate policy of famine insurance. The pharaohs understood that a predictable agricultural cycle, the Nile flooded on schedule almost every year, was something central planning could actually optimize. And optimize they did. Egypt's economy was remarkably stable for centuries. Dynasties rose and fell, but the fundamental system, flood, harvest, tax, store, distribute, kept rolling. It worked precisely because the Nile was predictable, and because a strong central authority could coordinate the entire chain from field to granary to workers' table. Then the Greeks showed up. After Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, the Ptolemaic dynasty took over around 300 BCE, and they brought with them a radical new technology: coinage, metal coins with stamped values. The future of money. But many Egyptians wanted nothing to do with it. They had used grain for millennia. It worked. It fed people. You can't eat a coin. The resistance to coinage was real, and the transition took generations. There's a lesson here that echoes across time. Egypt proved that a command economy, one where the state controls production, distribution, and payment, can work extraordinarily well under the right conditions. Predictable resources, strong administration, a shared understanding of the system, but it was also rigid. When conditions changed, when foreign rulers arrived with foreign ideas, the system that had survived for 3,000 years finally began to crack. Next episode, we travel to a small kingdom on the coast of modern-day Turkey, where around 600 BCE, someone had an idea that would change the world forever, stamping a piece of metal and calling it money. The invention of coinage, and once that genie was out of the bottle, nothing would ever be the same. I'll see you there.